Well, happy New Year's Eve. Welcome to day 6 of the 12 Days of Articles in Review. My name is Mary Coughlin. I'm the president and founder of Caring Essentials Collaborative, and we're going to wrap up 2017 with hopefully a very interesting articles review based off of an email that I received from a colleague who's working on a really admirable project around trying to consistently ensure that non-pharmacological pain strategies are employed in their newborn intensive care unit. So the email that she sent to me was her query about investigating if there's evidence about successful implementation for non-pharmacological strategies. And it was a great question, and unfortunately there's not an easy answer to this, right? I mean, the work that I do through Caring Essentials is really about that minding the gap, as I say. It's taking the evidence and translating it into practice consistently and reliably. So based on that question, I thought, all right, cool beans. I'm going to start, checking out some research that's been done in implementation science and see if I can come up with anything that would be helpful, not only for her, but for folks at large. And what I discovered is that everyone struggles with this, okay? There was some really interesting papers that talked about this challenge of de-implementing. And basically this idea of de-implementation is basically changing people's habits. One paper that I'm going to share with you was from a group of Gupta et al. It's a 2017 paper, and it talks about physicians' experience of changing clinical practice, the struggle to unlearn. That even when we're faced with the evidence, that these are best practices, for example, the use of non-pharmacological pain strategies, there's enough wiggle room that people will refute some of the evidence, or they'll argue with it, that it's just too difficult to embrace and transform their practice. Several of the papers talked about this phenomenon, not just with non-pharm pain strategies and practices related to developmental care or trauma-informed care, but even actual medical and or surgical practices, that the gap for translating is around 17 years, which was really striking. And practices that have actually been proven to be harmful continue to be employed. And again, we know this in the world of NICU. We know that it's harmful not to manage procedural pain. We know it's harmful to not manage pain at all, but certainly procedural pain. And yet we continue to struggle with changing that practice, changing that ritual and that routine. That these entrenched practices really become part of the way we do things here, right? It's a reflection of our culture. So it really is a challenge to change habits, change routines, different strategies. Once they're employed, can be effective, putting reminders and redundancies into the environment, making it easy to do the preferred best practice versus what you've been doing for 30 odd years and that sort of thing. There was one group that actually developed a checklist, and this was published in 2015 in the journal Implementation Science, where they said maybe developing a checklist for guideline implementation would be helpful. And sure, it sounds great on first pass, but then when I clicked on their checklist, holy macaroni, it was like, insanely long. And so this transformation of culture that we're talking about, and for my colleague looking at transforming pain management practices, is a journey that needs to be there needs to be a very clear and systematic approach to it, right? There needs to be accountability metrics integrated into the strategy. There also has to be very clear practice or performance expectations, and that clear consequences associated with not following what are these best practices. So it's not just an individual approach and we'll fix this and make it all better, that it really does take a village. I got to work with some really amazing folks out of Canada who developed the implementation guidelines for neuroprotective developmental care. And when you review that paper, and I'll include that reference as well, you can see that it's a very overarching approach. You have to get the buy-in for leadership. You have to get buy-in from all the different disciplines. There has to be a very deliberate strategy and testing and retesting what works and what doesn't work, because it's not one size fits all. Here's a best practice, but the journey to adopting that best practice may need to be modified in different settings based on resources, based on different people's ability to sign on for these new practices, right? So if I'm stuck in my way, and this is how I've been doing it for the past 30 years, I can only give you this much, right? Maybe I'm afraid. Usually the thing that holds people back from changing is fear, and fear about not doing the right thing, maybe messing up and causing more harm. But if I do it this way, I know how to do it this way, so I'm good to go. But it's not, again, about me or about us. It's about the patient. It's about the family. How do we consistently and reliably provide them with the best available care, with the best practices that are evidence-based? And so to my colleague for posing the question, awesome job. And I hate to tell you, but it is a journey, and there isn't a magic remedy for this. We have to look at where our baseline practices are. We have to identify what is the better practice, and then create a strategy that will help us move over and adopt this better practice. Being mindful that when folks don't get on board, there needs to be a process where you're going to address that. That if you say, this is the better practice, this is what we expect everybody to do, this, boom, and just think that everyone's going to do it, it's just not going to happen. And so putting that right out front, asking your colleagues, so what would be the fallout if folks don't fall in line with this? We're going to measure it, we're going to evaluate it, we're going to prove to ourselves that this is the best thing for our patients. We're going to look at patient outcomes, fiscal outcomes, whatever outcomes you want to look at. And then once you all say, wow, this is great, it really does work, we're all now going to do this starting January 1st, we're all on board, and watch the adoption and follow up with people. Gee whiz, Mary, we saw, this is our new practice, this is the expectation, you're not doing this. Can you help us understand why? Is there a knowledge deficit? What's the challenge? Well, maybe I'm just a jerk, and I don't believe in it, so I'm just going to keep doing what we used to do. Well, that can't be accepted. And that is a big part of this, this science around implementation and minding that gap, translating best practices and better practices into actual action. That's what it is that we're supposed to be doing. That's the journey that we're on, whether it's the latest and greatest surgical intervention, medication, or trauma-informed care practice. This is what the expectation is. So thanks for the question. I massively appreciate it. It really put me on a good spin to find some very interesting articles. I hope you find them relevant, and I'll wrap up this video right now by wishing you all the very best for a prosperous and joyful 2018. I'll see you next year. Bye.